Welcome to the 1 Hour Dress video. This is one of the programs associated with the digital exhibition, The Roaring Twenties and the Swinging Sixties, hosted by the museum at FIT. The exhibition explores many of the similarities seen in women's fashion of the 1920s and the 1960s, and we hope you'll have fun exploring some of its wider context through this program about some of the dress patterns that home seamstresses could have used in these decades.
So 4 of us are graduate students in the Fashion and Textile Studies, History, Theory, Museum Practice program at FIT. I'm Becca Carr.
And I'm Kenna Libes. This video was inspired by a 1924 pamphlet called The 1 Hour Dress by Mary Brooks Picken. She was a sewing expert and published close to 100 books on the subject during her lifetime. Picken also founded the Women's Institute of Domestic Arts and Sciences in Pennsylvania, taught at Columbia University, and helped develop the Costume Institute of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. She was also a trustee of our school, FIT, so I like to think that we're furthering her legacy with this video.
Advertisements from the 20s and 60s often claimed that you could finish making a dress in 1 hour or less, so we will be competing to see how fast we can do it. Curators Summer Lee.
Hi.
And Ellen Greene.
Hello.
Are here with us for discussion. As you might imagine, a lot of our footage is of us sewing, so they will be keeping it lively and asking us how it went.
I'll be using the original 1 Hour Dress instructions, kindly made available by the Antique Pattern Library, to make a plus-size frock. I'll be sewing this for a model who has a 53-inch bust, that's 135 centimeters, in order to see whether Pickens's method really works for any size. The booklet has methods for making several different styles with all sorts of details, and I opted for the standard one-piece dress that you see here with a V neckline to keep it simple.
I will be making a Mary Quant-inspired 1960s mini dress using a free pattern made by Alice & Co. Patterns and provided by the Victoria and Albert Museum as part of their 2020 Mary Quant exhibition. It comes in UK size 6 to 22, which is roughly a US 2 to 18. It also comes in several variations. I chose the sleeveless variation with keyhole neckline and rounded collar. This pattern is marketed as easy to use, and while it's not advertised as being a 1 hour dress, we felt like it was comparable to the style and pattern to use for this challenge.
And can you show us the fabrics you'll be using and explain why you chose them?
Yeah, so we got very lucky and found one store with perfect inspired fabrics. I scored this linen cotton blend plain weave midweight that worked nicely. It wasn't transparent or anything, which was important because neither of these dresses are lined. And the pattern is a painterly abstract print that would have been quite appropriate for the avant-garde prints of the 1920s.
My fabric is this amazingly bright Emilio Pucci inspired mod print in a quilt weight cotton, which gave the dress the bit of structure that it needed to be properly mod looking.
So before the competition begins, one of the big questions with this project is how easy are these dresses to make? What are your experience levels with sewing?
So I'm used to making historical clothing, but I usually use modern patterns, either printable or gridded, that are based on antique garments. I have used antique patterns before, and they tend to be pretty difficult. This one was similar because it's a text-based set of instructions without much in the way of diagrams. I definitely got a bit confused trying to figure it out on the fly.
And Becca, did you think it would be easy or somewhat complicated?
So I've worked as a seamstress in the theatrical costuming industry for years, but had actually never used a digital pattern that I had to print out and piece together. So I definitely learned the lesson to not underestimate the time it takes to do that. I also had a collar and set of pockets to make, which are not necessarily difficult, but they can be time consuming and fiddly.
Well, without further ado, let's get started. Now, our seamstresses had to try to cut and sew their dresses in 1 hour, although of course the footage we're watching now has been sped up considerably.
We originally thought that Becca would finish the 1960s style dress in time, since the pattern was ready-made and the instructions are pretty similar to modern patterns. But for Kenna, it sounded like she would have to take more time to understand exactly how to make this 1920s style dress, and drafting the initial shape would slow down the process. So Kenna and Becca, how long did it actually take?
Mine took roughly 50 minutes to make, not including the time it took to print out and tape together the pattern. It was relatively straightforward, although the other variations offered on the pattern could take more time.
I had a wearable dress in an hour, but not a finished one. The neckline, extra pleating, hem, sleeves, and closure took another hour and a half. I would also have liked to do long sleeves and potentially a belt, but I was already so past time that I stopped there. It's not on film, but I definitely wasted at least half an hour just trying to puzzle out instructions. And I also spent about 40 minutes beforehand just working on the instructions in my head and making a tiny mock-up. So actual cutting and sewing, 2 hours, perhaps 3 hours total.
Was the method easier or harder than a standard commercial pattern? And what sewing level would you recommend your pattern for?
I would say beginner to intermediate. The dress itself is easy to put together. You quarter your fabric like a snowflake, make the cutouts, sew up your quick seams, but the darts and facings might be a little complicated if you've never encountered those before. It would definitely have been easier to just cut it with a paper pattern, but the snowflake method does mean that you can make it to almost any size. And commercial patterns generally go up to only a 48-inch or 123 centimeter bust, which would have been too small for the model. So this method is way more inclusive, but there's more to wrap your head around. I don't think this is suitable for an absolute beginner just because of some of the terminology the instructions use, and I would definitely recommend that people make little mock-ups first.
The V&A put together a really comprehensive set of instructions, so I would say that it is actually easier to follow than a typical store-bought pattern. I didn't use it, but they also do have a video tutorial that really breaks down the steps and is aimed at beginners. The keyhole neckline, collar, and method that they use for the facing are probably more appropriate for someone who has sewn a garment before. So it's maybe not for a complete beginner, but it was still fairly easy to follow and make.
Did either of you make any big mistakes?
I didn't have any fusible interfacing, so the collar, pockets, and facings are all missing that, unfortunately. I don't think that it ultimately affected the drape, but it would have helped to create a more polished look.
For mine, the most complex part of the dress is the hips, where there are both pleats and darts, and I foolishly did the darts from the wrong direction because I got so bogged down with interpreting the instructions. But hey, the print is so wild that you can't even see it.
And Kenna, when I think of the 1920s, I still think of hand sewing, even though sewing machines were common. Did you end up hand sewing anything?
Yeah, so I had to sew in snaps at the shoulder for the closure, and I also hemmed it by hand so that it wouldn't show through the front. I totally could have blind stitched this on the machine, but I really like doing hems by hand, so I just did it with a big speedy cross stitch. Most long seams on homemade dresses at this time were done by machine, even if the other parts were done by hand. So I think this dress ended up being pretty accurate. It did annoy me though that there were no instructions for finishing the seams, so I just left them raw. But if I had made the dress seriously for myself, I would have overlocked them with a serger to prevent fraying.
For anyone who might want to try these sewing patterns for themselves, what did you both take away about your pattern?
I think that the V&A did a fantastic job providing a publicly accessible Mary Quant-inspired pattern that is easy to follow and has room for personalization and variety. I would recommend sizing up, as the ease provided in the pattern ended up being not quite enough for the model. It's worth noting that the pattern is all in metric. Now, I'm Canadian and I'm used to the metric system, so this wasn't an issue for me. But if you are used to sewing in inches, you may want to spend some time in the beginning converting everything.
For mine, it's worth noting that the plus size version requires an extra step at the beginning to insert a fabric panel, which of course you can't even see on this one because of the print. And I think I should have added more fabric in that panel so that there were larger pleats at the sides. Also, making it sight unseen on the model meant that I wasn't sure how much ease or extra room there should be, which Becca's standard sizing already, in theory, took into account. In the end, I think a little more ease would have been nice, so maybe keep an eye on that if you make it for yourself. But I honestly think it looks quite good on her.
Well, thank you both for talking to us about your experiences. As we continue watching your process play out on the screen, Ellen and I want to share some research we did into the historical context behind fashionable styles and home sewing during the 1920s and 1960s, starting with Ellen.
So by 1925, dress lengths were beginning to shorten and move up from where they started at the onset of the 1920s, which would have been just above the ankle. An early mention of the shortened style appears in the October 1924 issue of Harper's Bazaar. It was reported that Parisian couture houses were showing short dresses with low waists. This was going to become commonplace as the 1920s progressed. The shorter style of dress that began to emerge starting around the end of 1924 would continue over the next couple of years. By the late 1920s, hemlines would fall just below the knee. Shorter dresses were driven by a desire to look more youthful. In the April 1927 issue of Harper's Bazaar, Marjorie Howard wrote that, quote, "The desire to look as young as possible is the real explanation for the entire mode of today. It explains the craze for slenderness and the craze for sports and dancing to enable one to remain slender. It is responsible for the continuance of short skirts, the open neckline, and waistline at the top of the hip." But this silhouette didn't emerge overnight. The new and, quote, modern silhouette of the 1920s actually took about 10 years to develop, and we can see it start to emerge just before the start of World War I, which began in 1914. Women experienced greater economic and social freedom in the years following World War I, and as a result, women were now able to buy ready-to-wear clothing that was mass-produced and came in standardized sizes. The simple tube-like silhouette of this new style was ideal for mass assembly line production as well as home sewers. This enabled women of lower socioeconomic means to make their own fashionable clothes at home. A number of companies, including McCall's, Butterick, Simplicity, and Vogue, offered sewing patterns in fashionable styles. McCall Pattern Company even offered designs by Parisian couture houses Chanel, Le Mans, and V&A.
Yes, so flash forward to the 1960s, and according to the book Swinging 60s, published by the Victoria and Albert Museum, the 1960s were the last great age of home dressmaking in Britain. And they used an example from Nova, a rather radical British women's magazine, promoting dressmaking as the way that Cinderella could get to the ball without spending a fortune. And similar sentiments were expressed in fashion magazines in the United States. Contemporary articles about sewing describe it as a way to follow the latest fashion trends on a budget. But saving money was not the only motivation behind sewing in the 60s. One 1969 article I found detailed some top fashion models who were highly skilled in sewing and made themselves outfits for fun, altered things like a pantsuit into a knicker suit, and one model revealed that she simply needed to learn to sew because of how tall she was. And now, actually, while we're on the subject of sewing competitions and are literally watching one right now, from 1963 to 1965, 17 magazine hosted the National Fashion Council and Fashion Sewing Workshop competitions. The young ladies who won went on whirlwind trips to New York City, where they were treated to lots of culture, fine dining, and of course, special fashion industry experiences. For example, in 1963, the trip included a behind-the-scenes visit to McCall's Patterns. In 1964, winners had a gala breakfast party with DuPont fabrics, and in 1965, they met Mary Quant backstage at a 17 magazine fashion showing. And speaking of Mary Quant, we discussed earlier that Becca is sewing with a Mary Quant inspired pattern, and so were people in the 1960s. Mary Quant produced sewing patterns, and one she made with the Butterwick Company sold about 70,000 copies.
And finally, now for the big reveal. We're looking at the finished dresses, which are going to be modeled by two of her classmates. Right now, we're viewing behind-the-scene footage of the photo shoot taken by Diane, the exhibition's copy editor.
Starting with our Mary Brooks Picken 20s dress on the left, our model is Christiana, and she's done her hair in a way that emphasizes the short, horizontal width of 20 styles. She's wearing a pair of T-strap shoes to complete the look. I love the dress's little hip pleats. They're a really simple way to add some pizzazz. Now, the book advised that the dress could be paired with a collar and cuffs, presumably white, but we were on a time crunch, and making matching masks for our models in order to stay safe during a pandemic was a little more important.
And on the right is Sierra, who is modeling my 60s Mary Quant style dress. Her hair is straightened in a swoopy style with a headband. Her shoes are a fun, modern Mary Jane style that we decided would work well enough for the 60s. She's already told us that she wants to wear this dress in the future, which I'm really, really happy about.
They look so amazing. Also, the backdrop for the photo shoot is the Metropolitan Opera House, which was built in 1966 and is part of Lincoln Center here in New York City. The location needed to be outdoors, of course, due to social distancing precautions, but this was the middle of February in freezing temperatures. In fact, you can even see snow on the ground. So it was amazing that Sierra and Christiana braved the cold in these short cotton and linen dresses.
If you're interested in using the patterns featured in this video, links to both are available in the box below. We have also patterned several unique, antique, and plus-size 20s gowns for your use as part of the Plus Pattern Project, and those are available on the exhibition website.
We had a lot of fun with this project and hope that it has inspired some of you to try these out as well. Thank you so much for watching, and if you haven't already, we hope that you will click through to the virtual exhibition to learn more about 1920s and 1960s fashion.